Hey, welcome to Movement Church. Thanks for checking us out here online. As we're about to get started here at Movement Church, there's going to be a couple things going on that we would love for you to continue to engage with us. Here in a moment, we're going to turn this over to Rich and his wife Val, and they are going to be leading us in worship. And it might feel a little weird to sing there in your living room. Maybe you're by yourself or with your family. Man, we'd encourage you to do that, to participate with us. We're also going to be looking at a story of the Bible that happens in Exodus chapter 3. And so you're more than welcome to go ahead and turn there and get ready to follow along as we read that passage of scripture together. And then finally, during the message itself, I'll be having some time where I have some questions directly for you. And we would love for you to go ahead and participate in that. But man, I am so glad that you would just take time to worship with us. I know for me and my family that on Sunday morning that this is an opportunity for us to worship together, and we're in fact going to be watching along with you. I'm there in the comments hanging out with you guys as well. And we want to just treat this as a time where we can come to worship. Yeah, it's not normal, it's not typical, but man, this is a time for us to worship together. So I would encourage you right now. Now, maybe you just need to take a breath. Maybe there's been a kind of a hectic morning, a hectic week, a hectic month in the midst of all this change. To take a breath and realize that this is an opportunity to worship. And we are so glad that you've taken time to worship with us here this morning.
You call us out from the depths into your freedom, our chains are gone. No weapon formed shall prevail. Your word is stronger, we overcome. Your glory resounds through the age, all saints declaring your great renown. Your kingdom forever will stand. We won't be shaken. We will not fear. Our God, Almighty Warrior, you're a consuming fire. In victory you reign. We triumph in your name. Jesus, the great commander. You conquer death forever. In victory you reign. We triumph in your name. Your glory resounds through the age, all saints declaring your great renown. Your kingdom forever will stand. We won't be shaken. We will not fear. Our God, Almighty Warrior, you're a consuming fire. In victory you reign. We triumph in your name. Jesus, the great commander. You conquer death forever. In victory you reign. We triumph in your streams of mercy never ceasing, call for songs of loudest praise. Teach me some melodious sonnet sung by flaming tongues above. Praise the mount I'm fixed upon it, mount of thy redeeming love. Here I raise my Ebenezer, hither by thy help I've come, and I hope by thy good pleasure safely to arrive at home. Jesus on me when a stranger, wandering from the fold of God, he to rescue me from danger interposed his precious blood. Oh, that day when freed from sinning, I shall see thy lovely face, clothed then in blood-washed linen. How I'll sing thy sovereign grace. Come, my Lord, no longer tarry. Take my ransom soul away. Send thine angels now to carry me to realms of endless day. Oh, to grace, how great a debtor daily I'm constrained to be. Let thy goodness like a fetter bind my wandering heart to thee. Prone to wander, Lord, I feel it. Prone to leave the God I love. Here's my heart, oh, take and seal it for thy courts above. Here's my heart, oh, take and seal it for thy courts above.
Exodus chapter 3. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian, and he led the flock to the far side of the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in flames of fire from within a bush. Moses saw that though the bush was on fire, it did not burn up. So Moses thought, I will go over and see this strange sight, why the bush does not burn up. When the Lord saw that he had gone over to look, God called to him from within the bush, Moses, Moses. And Moses said, Here I am. Do not come any closer, God said. Take off your sandals, for the place where you're standing is holy ground. Then he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. At this, Moses hid his face because he was afraid to look at God. The Lord said, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I am concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians and to bring them out into the land, into a good and spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey, the home of the Canaanites and Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I've seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now go. I am sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, who am I, that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? And God said, I will be with you. And this will be the sign to you that it is I who have sent you when you have brought the people out of Egypt. You will worship God on this mountain. Moses said to God, suppose I go to the Israelites and say to them, the God of your fathers has sent me to you. And they ask me, what is his name? Then what should I tell them? God said to Moses, I am who I am. This is what you are to say to the Israelites. I am has sent me to you. God also said to Moses, say to the Israelites, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob has sent me to you. This is my name forever, the name you shall call me from generation to generation. Go assemble the elders of Israel and say to them, the Lord, the God of your fathers, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, appeared to me and said, I have watched over you and have seen what has done to you in Egypt, and I have promised to bring you up out of your misery in Egypt. Hey, welcome again to Movement Church. I'm glad that you're taking some time to check this out, and we'd encourage you to engage with us as much as possible. So there's going to be a couple times during my message today where I'm going to be asking a question, and would love for you to participate. We'd love for you to comment in the comment section, to talk about this if you're watching this with maybe your family or other things. But today, we are kicking off our brand new series called Wilderness, that God speaks in the seclusion. Now, we all know that what seclusion is like. We know what isolation could feel like, quarantine, whatever word you want to talk about as we're kind of all doing our part to fight this pandemic, that this is different. But what's not different is that we have the capacity to distract ourselves, right? We have the capacity to distract ourselves in profound ways. And so think about it this way. There's probably something that you're doing in your life to kind of fill the time. Maybe it's a mindless game on your phone, or maybe it's that Netflix show that you're just powering through, or something like that. So right now, in the comment section, just to get us started, share your favorite thing to kind of distract yourself from all this right now. Maybe it's just kind of going through social media. I'd love to do that. It's just kind of something fun to do. I know at my house, we've been kind of doing some movie marathons. It feels like every night is a Friday night, every morning is a Monday morning. So we did all 4 Toy Stories, and we did the 2 Frozens, of course. And so we're just kind of working our way through some of those things. And so I'm just curious what yours is right now, because even in the midst of this quarantine, of this social distancing, this pandemic that we're all facing, as we're staying at home and not able to gather here, we are still finding things to distract ourselves. Now, some of that I think is really healthy, right? Like, we need to disconnect, we need to take care of ourselves a little bit. But as we all know, too much of even a good thing is still too much. So in this series, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be looking at that biblical pattern that we see, that when people are in isolation, when they're in the wilderness, when they are in quarantine, whether they choose that or because that is the situation they find themselves in, what does God do in those moments? How is God still speaking to us? But before we do that, I want to kind of look at our own lives a little bit. I want you to think about those times where you have found yourself in a spot of freedom, a spot of independence. Okay, a time where you were really able to kind of seek that out. Maybe you want to share some of these stories. I'm sharing some of my own right there in the comments. But what I have found in those times is that even though I'm seeking independence and seeking to be myself and on my own, I still am being drawn back to others, to relationship. So I remember as a little kid, I go shopping with my mom, and my sister would be there, and I would always try to sneak away to kind of hide, right? And it wasn't anything real serious. I think my mom always knew where I was, but there was those circular clothes racks, kind of those islands of clothes, of hanging clothes, and I could get in there in the middle of it and kind of hide from my parents. I remember that on the day I got home from school, and my sister had gone off to college. She had moved in the previous weekend. So I was a freshman in high school. She was a freshman in college. As much as I loved my sister then and now, I like her a lot more now than I did then. And so when I got home and she wasn't there, I remember cranking up my stereo really, really loud because she hated it when I did that. And it was probably a Metallica CD or like a Rage Against the Machine CD or something like that. And I just blared it. But then I realized pretty soon that the real enjoyment from that wasn't listening to loud music, as great as that is. It was that it annoyed her, right? Or I think about the time where I got my license. The night I got my license, my driver's license, that time I was 16, and I had that sense of freedom, and I didn't know where I was going to go, but I just wanted to drive, right? I wanted to drive on my own. And so I drove, and I had nowhere really to go, and I found myself back home a lot sooner than I anticipated. Because that's the thing, that when we get off by ourselves, I think it's in those moments that we most realize we miss people. Most realize that we need connection with other people. Now, it may take us a while, it may go through some different stages, but I think even when we are alone, we're seeking out other people. I don't know about you, but the times where I've taken a walk through my neighborhood or I've been out in the front yard with the kids, I am a lot more chatty with my neighbors, and I have great neighbors, but I'm having a lot more conversations with them now than I was a year ago. And I think it's because as we're pushed more and more towards that isolation, we're seeking people out. The same thing happens in the Bible. We see this over and over again, where people are driven out, they're pushed away, and in the midst of that isolation, they're seeking others out. And so in this series, we're going to look at a lot of different characters of the Bible. Today we're going to look at Moses, but in the coming weeks we're going to talk about the prophet Elijah. We're going to look at King David. We're going to look at Jesus and his wilderness experience. And we're going to look at Paul when he was in home arrest, home confinement there in prison. And we're going to look at how when these guys are alone, God speaks to them in the midst of those moments. So one of the most important stories of the Bible is the story of Moses, and we're going to start there. Moses is this profoundly interesting character to me because, like a lot of the main characters that we read about in the Bible, they aren't perfect. Like, they're highly, highly flawed. And Moses is no different. If you don't know the story, let me kind of recap and give you kind of some of the highlights. Moses was born to a Hebrew, an Israelite family. And he's born in Egypt, and the Israelite people are slaves in Egypt. And there was an edict, there was kind of an order given by the Pharaoh that was kind of about population control, and the newborns of the Israelites were being exterminated. This is a terrible, dark thing, right? And Moses' mother realizes that she has to give up her son in order for him to survive. And it's kind of this serendipitous, kind of this amazing story where she crafts a basket that's very reminiscent of Noah and Noah's Ark, and crafts this basket and puts him in the river, puts this baby Moses in the river, and is picked up by someone from Pharaoh's household. And so Moses is raised in the royal palace, kind of like a half-brother, kind of like an adopted sibling to the prince, to the eventual Pharaoh. So Moses comes of age, and he knows his origin story. He knows his ethnicity, right? He knows that he is an Israelite living in Pharaoh's palace, in Pharaoh's household. And there's this moment as he's coming of age where he sees an Egyptian slave master abusing an Israelite slave. And he lashes out. He snaps in this moment. He snaps in this moment. He becomes violent, and he kills this Egyptian slave master. What happens there is that shame from that event begins to build. And the shame only builds when it's in isolation, right? It builds because Moses is finding himself in the midst of this grief and this remorse and this regret and this panic and this fear, being kind of pushed away both by his adoptive family and his family of origin. So he runs. He flees. Moses leaves everything behind and runs and runs and runs. Moses finds himself miles and miles away. And that's exactly what shame does to us, right? Maybe not literally, but shame drives us away from other people, right? Shame tells us that we're not worthy, that no one can love us, that no one can forgive us, no one can accept us. Shame isolates us, right? Whatever the addiction that we may be facing or dealing with, whether it's socially acceptable or not, whether it's highly destructive or just more long-term destructive, that addiction, that shame that it builds pushes us away, right? It pushes us away. And this is what happens to Moses. He runs, he tries to escape it, he goes miles and miles and miles away to another people, to another group of people, and he takes on a job that is just about as far away from a palace life as you can get. He becomes a herder. He becomes a shepherd. And he's out there in the wilderness doing his job. And God shows up. This is years after the incident. This is years after he has left Egypt, that he has fled. And he's out there in the isolation, in the wilderness, out in the middle of nowhere probably. And he sees something supernatural. He sees something supernatural and he is humbled by it. Because that's what happens in isolation. We get humbled. We get humbled. Maybe you've had these moments of humility already, or maybe you're going to. Maybe you have that moment of humility when you realize just how much you appreciate your kids' school and teachers. You appreciate the fact that, man, the wait staff and the servers at those restaurants that put up with my odd request and refill my water 5 or 6 times or whatever, or deal with the mess my kids make. And I really miss that. I appreciate that. I'm humbled because I don't have that. Maybe for you, you've been humbled by this idea that you had these big plans for opening day. You're going to go to the parade, you're going to go to the game, you're so excited for the baseball season to start, or maybe you're humbled by the fact that you can't get together to watch the Final Four or the Masters. You're humbled by these things that you no longer have. Or maybe in this very real time of loss, of grief, you're humbled by the fact that you can't go visit someone. Someone who maybe is in a nursing home or assisted living, someone who is ill, you can't go to the hospital to visit them. Maybe you're even humbled by this fact that you can't go to a funeral home. You can't go pay respects and say goodbye and participate in that kind of communal grieving process. But there's been these moments where you have been humbled. Where you have been humbled because you realize you weren't appreciating something that was so there 2 months ago. That was so available to you, and now that it's gone, it's something that you really, really miss. Because when we're in the wilderness, when we're in isolation, we have to start with humility. And this is what we see Moses doing. So Moses is out there in the middle of nowhere, and he sees a sight that can't be explained, right? He sees something that forces humility on him. Maybe you've had an experience like that. It's something that you can't even begin to wrap your mind around. And the only thing that you can do, the only proper, genuine response you have is to say, I don't know. Moses has an I don't know experience where he sees a bush, some sort of shrub that's on fire, yet isn't being burned up. And so I have to think that he saw this from a distance, and maybe he gets closer and he waits and watches and is kind of looking around. Is someone playing some sort of joke here? Am I hallucinating? Am I going crazy? All those sorts of things. And as Moses approaches this, there's this voice that comes out of this burning bush. And he quickly realizes that this is something beyond him, and in an act of humility, he takes off his sandals because he realizes the ground he's standing on is set apart, is sacred, is something different from the normal. I think right now we are in some sacred moments. We are in some moments of life that are so unique, so different, so stressful, so hard, so mundane at times, that we have to recognize that this isn't normal. The first thing that Moses has to do is recognize that there are things outside of his control. And a simple way that he shows that humility is by taking off his sandals. I often will hear people say that they believe in God. They'll talk about how they'll kind of look around and they'll say, well, this all didn't come from nothing. Like something had to start this, and nature and creation and humankind and whatever it might be. They'll think about the times in which there have been things that have happened that they can't explain. They're, for lack of a better term, they're supernatural. They're beyond our understanding. And they say, well, I just have to humble myself and say that's beyond me. So there's got to be a force or some sort of presence or some sort of person above and beyond all of this. This goes beyond explanation. And even in the midst of a challenge, of a trial, they sense that they aren't alone. Now, I would imagine that for many of us, there's been times in this last month or so where we have felt very much alone. We have felt the weight of this isolation. And I would hope that for many of us, we have had those moments when in the midst of some really dark times of some despair, some anger, frustration, where we have received some peace, something that we can't really define or explain, but there's this notion that we're not alone. Those are those humbling experiences that I think push us towards this realization that there's something else there. Now, this is a crucial step for us in our faith development, right? Like we got to walk before we run. We have to start wherever we are. And so maybe for you, your next step in this whole faith journey of exploring Jesus, of trying to figure out what this means, of finding meaning and truth, is to simply say, I can't explain these things. They go beyond my understanding. That is an act of humility. And I think when we start with humility, things begin to happen. We can take our next step. This voice coming from the bush gives instructions to Moses, kind of lays out this plan that Moses is going to return. He's going to go back to the place that he had fled. He's going to go back to the place that he has been running from and face some of those demons, some of those past experiences, face that shame. And he's going to go back as a leader, as someone who is left in shame, is going to return as a leader to lead his people out of that slavery. Well, Moses, I so respect this, and I find this so interesting that he is quick to object to what this voice is saying. Moses in humility is recognizing this is beyond what I can understand, and this voice is identifying himself as the God of Moses' forefathers, of the generations past. And I would imagine that there's something for Moses where he's aware of this, but also feels very distant from it. And he's saying this God of the stories that I've heard is now here and explaining this to me, but man, these stories feel kind of dead and lifeless. And so he objects to this mission, this plan that God is giving him. And he says, well, who are you? Give me a name. Give me something that I can go back to the people and say, this God sent me. I love that after humility, Moses goes for relationship, right? Moses goes, I want to know you. I don't want to just get the marching orders. I want to know who you are. And God, in this profound statement, simply says, I am. I am. I am before you. I am after you. I am with you. I am here. I am now. I am past. I am present. I am future. I am. In Hebrew, this gets translated as Yahweh. This is kind of the name of God that kind of speaks to God's power, God's presence, and God's majesty, but is not disrespectful. Because to say the name of God with our unclean lips, with who we are and our brokenness, would be an affront. And so it's kind of a backdoor way of saying this is who God is, that God is. I love that Moses, in humility, seeks out relationship. And what I find so much more compelling is that God responds. God doesn't say, how dare you ask this? God gives relationship. He gives part of himself. So in this isolation of this moment, Moses goes further than just taking in this incredible sight. He goes further than just being blown away by the enormity of this mission. He is able to connect with God. See, I think that this is a lesson for all of us, that we are called to pursue God. We are called to examine, to explore who this God is, what this God is about. We are challenged to know God, not to just obey God. We are challenged to be in connection and relationship with God, not just to know about God. I also love that Moses is realizing that this mission that Yahweh is putting him on, it is not something that he's going to have to do alone. See, I think Moses is afraid, not of necessarily what God is telling him to do. I think Moses is afraid of facing his shame, of returning from isolation and facing up the things of his past. Because I think that speaks to our deepest fears. Moses is afraid of being found out. Moses is afraid of facing the consequences. And so he comes up with all these other objections. Well, how will they listen to me? How are they going to see me as an authority? And God gives him these tools, and he gives him these abilities and these powers and this authority to carry out this message. He gives him promises as to what God is going to do to help this along. Because God doesn't really need Moses. God is inviting Moses in. He's bringing him to be a part of it. Moses even says that he's not a good speaker, that he stumbles over his words, that he's not somebody who's going to command people. And God gives him two people to come alongside him, because God is in the business of making things right, not just for one person or one people, but for all. He says that your brother Aaron, your sister Miriam are going to come alongside you. They're going to be your mouthpiece. Aaron is the public speaker, and Miriam is this artist, this creative person, just musician. And so she's going to take these incredible things of God and put them in this creative moment. He says, we're going to give you these people to do these things, but these aren't just people. These are your brother and your sister. I'm going to give you a community of people to go forward, because God is about putting things back, putting things right. See, we live in these strange and uncertain times, but I think that regardless of the literal isolation that many of us feel, is not new. I think for many of us, we know exactly these patterns. We may not have experienced it to this total degree or this kind of forced degree or this way in which we're all experiencing it, but we know what it is to withdraw. We know how shame pushes us. We know how shame isolates us, and shame tells us that we're not worthy of other people. We think no one will accept us. We have these private moments where we experience something profound. We experience Jesus. We experience God's plan and goodness, but we aren't quite sure how to take that to other people. I think about this story of Moses and his whole arc, and that we find in Exodus a lot, because for me, this is a kind of a crucial story of the Bible, right? This tells us quite a bit about what God is like. In this story, we see that Moses, by his background, is very much qualified for this role, but also by his actions has disqualified himself. I think about how God in this story and countless other times throughout the Bible isn't using people, isn't inviting people into this process because he needs them to accomplish something. Most of the time, these people are, I would say all the time, these people are highly, highly flawed. These are people with huge, huge issues. And Moses is just like that. But the God of the Bible, the God that we see so clearly in Jesus, is interactive, is personal, is relational. God's power doesn't need us, but God's love chooses us, invites us to take part. And it starts for us in a similar pattern that we see with Moses and we see in countless other times. It starts with this sense of humility, that God is up to something that is beyond us, that the God of the Bible, the God of the universe, the God who loves us is coming close, is seeking us out, not ignoring aspects of our life, but fully taking all of it on, being fully aware of Moses' entire story, being fully aware of my story and yours, all our flaws and all our regrets. God is fully aware of this and still inviting us in. And once we have humbled ourselves, then we can be invited into God's purpose and plan. So perhaps in the midst of your quarantine right now, there's kind of a part of you that's kind of relieved. Because for this, you've been able to hide a little bit. And because of this, you haven't had to face some people or some things or some consequences. You've been able to withdraw, and it's been encouraged. You've been able to kind of flee and run away. And in this midst of isolation, I don't think that God is done with you. I don't think this is an excuse to just stay hidden. I think in this time, in this incredibly unique time, that God is still calling us to be about what he's about. And this plan that God has to make things right, not just to remove us from this situation, not just to kind of make things a little bit better, but to restore things fully. This plan that God has, this highly, highly loving and highly inefficient and highly beautiful plan that God has for the world. A big key of it is God's power working through you and I. It's people like us seeing this come into reality. So even though this time is full of isolation and loneliness, grief and loss, frustration and anger, this is still a time where God is at work. And so my question for you is, how are you going to pursue God in this time? How are you going to follow Jesus in this time? Because God is not done with us. God is not simply saying, you're on our own. That even though we're in isolation, even though we're still surrounded by distractions, may you fight. May you fight for moments of seclusion where God will speak. May you fight for times when you can humble yourself before God and listen. And may you experience the voice and the compassion and the presence of God in the midst of times like this. Because not only does God work in these times, I think God especially works in times like these. Whether it's because of our shame that we have withdrawn, or whether it's because we are trying to love our neighbors by withdrawing. Whether it's because we are forced into this or we choose this, whether it's because we're hiding from something, or whether it's because it's the right thing to do. We, in the midst of this isolation, can still hear the voice of God. We can still approach God. We can still connect and relate and love our Father. Because the God of the Bible, the God we see in Jesus, is wanting to give us that full life and is wanting to invite us in. And it starts by simply being humble and listening. Let me pray with you. God, I pray for those of us that are overwhelmed in the midst of this, that are overwhelmed by the isolation and the loneliness and the fear and the anxiety about the future. I pray for those that are that are working harder than maybe they ever have in their lives. Those who are the helpers, the people who are taking care of us, the people who are essential in so many senses of the word. But that, God, I pray against the dark side of this whole thing, the dark side of loss, of pain, of suffering, of disease. I pray against the dark side of that isolation and that loneliness and that despair. And I pray that you would show us those moments, those sacred, set apart, holy moments where we can hear your voice, where we can connect with you, where your love for us, your plan for us is shown fully. And so, God, I'm praying for everybody who's hearing this. That yes, that they would be safe. That yes, they would remain healthy, but more so that they would come to know you, not just in the midst of this time as an afterthought, but because this time forces us to come face to face with you, to come face to face with what you're doing and what you have for us in the days ahead. So thank you, Father. Thank you for this story of Moses. Thank you for coming in the person of Jesus and showing us what this looks like. Thank you for your Spirit that guides us and leads us. And thank you for your church, the global historical church that is full of people who are just trying to humble ourselves and listen to what you have, to listen to your plan, and to follow you forward. Thank you, Father. It's in your Son's name we pray. Amen. So thanks again for spending some time with us this morning. And I just hope that whatever we've done, the singing, the music as we worship in that way, what I had to share was just a time where you were able to connect. Our mission statement here at Movement Church is to help people find and follow Jesus. We believe that we are called to follow Jesus. So right now, maybe you've already got this set up. I know at home I'll have all this set up with my family. We're going to take communion together. Now, typically when we gather in person, we do little pieces of bread and we have juice, and maybe you have that at home, maybe you don't. That's fine. Whatever you have, it'll work. But we would invite you right now to take communion. And I just want to talk you through this as you do it. So go ahead, right now where you're at, go ahead and start that. So maybe let's imagine you have a plate of bread. I'd encourage you to take a piece of that bread. To take a piece of that bread and think about what it represents. Because what it represents is that Jesus gave his life for you. That he was tortured and beaten and nailed to the cross. And maybe right now you eat that bread, or you take that bread and you dip it in some juice, or you take a drink of that juice, because the juice or the water or whatever it is that you have represents the blood that was shed. We read in the New Testament that whenever the early church would come together, we read that all those people after that first Easter, for the years that we have recorded throughout history, whenever they would gather, that this was something they would do. They would share in this meal. They would share in this meal together as a way of declaring that God is not done with them, that following Jesus continues. And so we invite you to do that. And so thank you for just being a part of this, for worshiping with us, for allowing us to help you find and follow Jesus. One of the things that I love about getting together in person in church is being able to walk with you, being able to connect with you and hear what's going on in your life. And obviously now there's some challenges to that. And so we want you to reach out. I think that so many of us are kind of overwhelmed with content, of things to do, of advice, of ways to spend their time, ways to interact with our kids. And I think that what is lacking is connection. I think we're starved for connection. And so I'd encourage you to take a step. One of the easy ways to do that is to go to our website, movementnky.com. And you're going to find a page, the Movement Online page, and that page is going to show you all the ways that you can connect with us moving forward. You can get involved in a group, because we have groups that are meeting online right now. You can reach out to us. We would love to talk to you more. Maybe you're at a place where you're making a decision for the first time to follow Jesus. Man, we would love to come alongside you in that. And so we'd ask you to reach out, to take a step. We'd also ask you that in this time where we're all starving for connection, that you would reach out to one another. That maybe you need to reach out and you need to send this link to somebody else, the link of this service. Or maybe you just need to go through your contact list on your phone. You need to make some calls or send some texts. Just to check in on people, just to communicate to them and let them know that you're praying for them. Man, I want this to be a time. I want us to be able to look back on that spring of 2020 and say, that was a time when the church stepped up. And so many of you who call Movement Church home have been doing just that. And I want to thank you for that. I've seen the way that you've been reaching out to people, the way that you've been fostering those connections, those relationships. I've seen the way that you've been generous. We ask people who call Movement Church home to give financially. Not so that we would have a church building, not so that we would keep lights on, but so that we can be the church, so that we can be generous, so that we can continue to worship by saying what God has given us. Man, all of it is his to begin with, and we return a portion back. And so if you call Movement Church home, I would encourage you to continue or to consider giving. Because giving is not about a budget. Giving is not about a payroll. Giving is about us declaring that God is in control, and that humble act like Moses. And giving is a way for us to take a step in following him. So I would encourage you to do just that. You can go to our website. You can check us out on our app, another great resource there for you. But this is a time for us as a church to be there for you, to be there and support and walk alongside you. So I would challenge you. I'm asking you to reach out to us, to reach out to other people as we take steps, as we help one another find and follow Jesus. I so appreciate you guys and taking the time to be with us this morning. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you around here online and definitely next Sunday.